I'm going to do a brief introduction here. First of all, I'd like to say thank you so much to Josh Vermillion for returning back to the mothership to give us a tutorial on how to interrogate this tool that we're examining. It's so amazing to watch Josh blow up in the discourse about artificial intelligence. And it's just we're all sitting here at Ball State cheering and watching you flourish with these energies. As a kind of an introduction, I want to frame just a little bit about the sort of concluding remarks that Josh made just this morning in artificial intelligence Pachakacha that was led by Neil Leach on YouTube. And he made some very provocateur kinds of comments as he was dazzling us with the eye candy in the background. And I'm going to repeat some of the things that he said. Ask him to address that as a means of getting started on this project. So to begin. He talks about this notion of the uncanny and the ability to interrogate these tools. And he said something that really resonated with me. He said, perhaps we can get down to the serious task of studying this new language literally. He said, the pictures are cool, but aren't the words and ideas as valuable? And the last part, which I really appreciated, was that he said, by examining our means of communication with these new tools, call it prompt craft, if you want, we come to what I feel is fundamentally a human prompt. And it will help reveal our values and ethos as a design discipline. Wow, Josh, that's something, huh? That was really amazing comment that you said. There. And I'd like to kind of start with that. Maybe you could comment a little bit, because I know we're just going to get under the hood on how to get going with this. But I really want I didn't want to interrupt the YouTube thing with some clarification about that. But can you talk a little bit about that and how you've been deploying this tool with your students as you're studying this new language? And perhaps, the language as a mediator would be a launching point, talking about critical thinking and curation, taste, curating words, et cetera, and how you're beginning to use this tool to educate your students.
Sure. Thanks very much for that great introduction, Kevin. It's great to be back. I used to get all kinds of emails from Kevin Klinger. It's been a while. I got one the other day with the Zoom link. So thanks for inviting me back to Ball State, albeit virtually. Indeed, Kevin just mentioned I've been going at this for the last 3 hours here. I started at 7 a.m. this morning with Neil on digital futures and the Pechakucha and but yeah, so thanks for that. And maybe to just sort of what you asked for in that quote at the end. I think a lot of folks are sort of looking at this from a lot of different directions, these technologies. There's a creative dimension to them. There's an ethical dimension to them. There's whenever technology sort of makes a big leap or jump, it has this tendency to make us sort of look at ourselves in the mirror and sort of ask us critical questions about ourselves. And so, I think that's really important. It's really important to sort of step back sometimes and ask ourselves if we really are making progress and which direction that's going. And so, with the artificial intelligence and particularly with the diffusion models and these language models, I found it really interesting to sort of say, well, it's up to us. I think we can't cede this ground to just the tech companies. We have to sort of interrogate these tools. We have to look at them. I want my students to actively ask themselves, how do I use this for good instead of evil? How's this stuff not replace me, but augment what I'm trying to do? How does it help me? And so that's what I've been looking at. And honestly, this is like the first time I've ever gotten design students, architecture students actually want to write things. Sometimes that can be a real uphill battle, a real chore, it feels like. But not only to like sort of say, well, here I'm just going to write a paragraph to talk about what I want or what my goals or desires are, but then to itenerate it, to like sort of go back to it, continuously refine it, try to be expressive with it, and to think about how those ideas, or always to keep those ideas, I guess, in the forefront, and not in the back of their mind, but in the front of their mind, right, as they're working and however they're working. And so with these language models, you start by plain language, right? So it almost seems kind of cruel that, when I started, we had to learn how to draw things manually and redraw things, and some, eventually that meant moving a mouse around the screen instead of maybe a pencil on the drafting board. And that's also included things like writing computer scripting and those sorts of things. And now suddenly we can communicate with our computers with plain language. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And maybe with that, I'll get going, and I'll continue to touch on some of the things that Kevin brought up as we go. And I'm hoping that I've broken this up so that at key times there's places to pause and sort of field questions or comments. My goal is I'll beat you over the head with a few slides, but then afterwards we can sort of do some hands-on stuff and some back and forth. So let me just share my screen like I promised. Oh, you have to enable me with your security button to let me share my screen. I'm just a participant. It won't let me share, and I think that's
okay. Yeah, let me get on
yeah.
that.
It's been a while since I thought over Zoom, so well. But while that's going on, I will just say that I've given a couple of workshops already. I did one for the parametric architecture guys. I was just over in Phoenix actually working with a couple of firms over there that are really interested in this stuff. And so whether you're in school or out of school, practicing or more on the theoretical side of things, everybody's interested in these new technologies and what you can and can't do with them, where they're at and maybe where they're going. Let's see if I have, perfect, I can share now. I'm just going to share my desktop at the risk of you seeing my really sloppy desktop with all of these icons. I always practice file management or preach file management, but I'm less about practicing file management, it seems, these days. And here we go. So again, thanks for inviting me here. It's good to be back. Kevin might have mentioned this, but Ball State is near and dear to my heart. So it's been, gosh, it's almost been 10 years since I've been there. So at any rate, let's get this thing rolling. Here are a few links, and I can email this out to Kevin to share with you if you'd like. But these are what we'll be talking about today. So there's the midjourney.com. Hopefully you signed up for a Midjourney account. If you haven't already, I'd actually be surprised if most of you haven't tried it out in some capacity, whether it's Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, Adobe Firefly just came out. So I'll touch on these and show you some of those platforms here in a bit. We do a lot of things on Discord. Midjourney runs through Discord. Actually, you basically just use Discord to chat with the Midjourney bot, send it direct messages back and forth. The direct message you images back. And then I recommend a thesaurus. Online thesauruses are good things because they can help you reframe your prompts, your text, your language, about what you're thinking, how you're thinking about your design concept, your goal, your ideas, and how to communicate them to the diffusion model. Okay, so. And this is basically it. So when you use Midjourney for the first time, you might say /imagine. That's the command, and then it basically lets you type in whatever you'd like. Well, mostly whatever you'd like. There's a few banned words here and there to keep you from making things for nefarious purposes. But in this case, I just typed in the totally generic and short, a tall interior space. And this was four examples of things that it gave back to me. Right. So I didn't specify the mood, the atmospherics, any materials or anything else. It just very generic, a tall interior space. And it gave me what I asked for, right? Even if it's not exactly what I had in my head. And so let's talk a little bit about how we can begin to think about, or how we can think about writing these prompts, right? So, you know, I've done these before. What I found is really interesting is you can write really short prompts, and you can let the model ad lib for you if you'd like, but you can really dive in, I think, with the sort of trying to take the vivid picture that is in your brain of your idea, and actually try to write it just as vividly or expressively out, and see how the Midjourney model interprets it. So this is sort of how I think about it, sort of the anatomy of a prompt here. I start by sort of thinking about the type of space, right? What kind of space? Do I give it a specific program, or do I talk about what's happening inside of it, what its geometric characteristics are, the kind of lighting, the kind of mood, who is in that space, or what is in that space, right? Again, sort of thinking about it as a tableau, right? You know, you always think about maybe the idea that you're getting images out. You could always think about you know, the sort of scene that you're hoping this thing will paint for you, right? So you can also approach it from, you know, what kinds of surfaces, their geometry. Do you want to express some sort of materiality? Oftentimes I experiment by, you know, using or misusing materials, and seeing what kind of weird, fantastic, sometimes genius, and other times idiotic things it does with materials, since it doesn't really understand materials. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the qualities that the materials possess, are we talking about heavy, thick masonry, or are we talking about light, gossamer, light transmitting fabric, or, you know, something like that, right? We can start to, again, express certain words, and these models are trained on words. So the more you can sort of evoke imagery that you can evoke through words from its training, the more interesting results you tend to get out. So what kind of textures and patterns, etc. And then last, we can think about scale and frame. So you know, we can think about the generic square outputs that it gives, or we can adjust the aspect ratio for vertical, more portrait or ratioed images, or landscape, or horizontally ratioed images. Again, we can talk about using the space, who's using the space, but then to talk about or have it try to draw scale figures, again, to sort of imply either program to activate the spaces, show scale, etc. What kind of objects are in the space, what kind of camera even. You'll see some examples of this in a bit. And what is our vantage point? So you can use the whole range of photography and Hollywood videography sort of terms to sort of begin to describe, well, where am I in relation to what I'm visualizing? And again, I hope to show some examples of this. Are we on eye level perspective? Are we in an aerial shot looking down? Is this should it start to scrape all the images it has from, let's say, Google satellite imagery, et cetera, right? So you can begin to sort of mix and match words, trying to sort of, depending on how much control you like to have at the results at the end. Let me just minimize this Zoom interface. All right, so, and then this is the sort of anatomy of a typical prompt, right? So you say /imagine, and then here in the center, we have whatever prompt we want to use. At the beginning, if we want to use things other than text, we want to use images for prompts, or images in conjunction with text for prompts. We can put the URL of an image, or more than one image actually, at the very beginning. And then there's some parameters we can begin to add at the end, depending on if we want to change the size or aspect ratio of things. There's a number of these that we'll go over, but the aspect ratio is one of the most common ones that you'll see, right? So in this case, it's saying, I don't want the square output, I want an aspect ratio of 9:16. That would be 9 wide to 16 in height. Let's see here. All right, so an example prompt. Let's talk about these and sort of see what they give us before we start writing some on our own. This is an example prompt. It said, imagine an immersive spatial installation made from undulating, translucent, drippy, wax-covered feathers hanging from the ceiling of a tall gallery with volumetric lighting. Now, admittedly, that's a pretty weird thing to do, to say, like, I want drippy, wax-covered feathers. And I don't know where I was going with this, except to say that maybe, I like to sort of look at these tools and sort of say, well, what's the kind of geometry or effect that I can't easily like draw or model or render myself? Feathers is one of those things that, its texture, its shape, the way it sort of reflects, refracts, and transmits light is not something that would be easy to sort of make with a traditional digital workflow. And so I was sort of thinking maybe this is a way to, something that might take me 9 days would only take like, 90 seconds, right? To sort of, see what pops out here. So what I like to do is sort of test things that are maybe counterintuitive in order to see how the diffusion model actually tries to put disparate things together in one composition. And so this is an example of that. So, I not only use the word feather to try to get that sort of feathery texture, but I also talk about drippy wax and, other sorts of things that are translucent. The word undulating comes in. I give it a setting hanging from the ceiling of a tall gallery space, and I talk a little bit about the lighting. Volumetric lighting, meaning maybe there's even light rays coming in, but this sort of dramatic lighting. Contrast between bright lights and a dark interior, deep shadows, etc. And you can see in this example, it gave me something not really surprising. It kind of really gave me what I asked for here. Here's another example, again, a really literal interpretation of my prompt. The prompt was a stunning city of intricately stacked and iteratively interlocked apartment unit towers. Lots of glass, modern architecture, extremely coherent, wide shots, volumetric lighting, and architectural photography. So this was actually using an earlier model of Midjourney, where you'll see that I have lots of phrases in here separated by commas, and that's something I did with that particular model. So let's talk about this. Let's dive in for a minute. So, ultimately what I start with is exactly what I want to see, right? What's the subject here? I'm almost, telling it that this is like a magazine cover, right? Of, let's say this push-pull stacked volume apartment building, intricately stacked, iteratively interlocked apartment unit towers, right? Just sort of trying to give it some words that it can really grasp with. Just to say that, there's a bunch of pieces here sort of put together. So it's really a part to whole sort of thing. Lots of glass. So I start to describe some other things here, like the materials. I try to, give it some sort of sense of this is going to be modern architecture, contemporary architecture, as opposed to classical architecture or, something like that. If you don't specify that, you sometimes get some really weird results, right? And I can appreciate the weird, actually. Extremely coherent. I'm just telling it to, try to lock it in to sort of give me a ground plane, to make sure the sky meets the horizon and those sorts of things. Wide shots is talking about our vantage point, right? So if we're the photographer with a camera, I want to sort of establish a foreground, a midground, a background, right? So a wide shot does that. It sort of places the subject in the center, or maybe even slightly off center, provides some context around it, right? So we can start to understand it a little better. It's not a close-up, it's a wide shot, right? Volumetric lighting, again, talking about lighting and architectural photography. So And then there's that --AR. That's the aspect ratio modifier. In this case, I'm giving it a 9:16 ratio, aspect ratio, to make this a vertical image, right? Vertically framed image. And I think on this next one, I'm using similar language, but in a completely different scale and a completely different way. All right, so yeah, you'll see the intricately stacked and iteratively interlocked language here. But in this case, I'm saying I want a stunning, organically shaped atrium and courtyard with the intricately stacked and iteratively interlocked stone blocks. I name drop a few architects here, like Peter Zumthor, Herzog, and Demiron. Then I say lots of glass, modern architecture, extremely coherent. Plants and moss and ivy with golden sunlight filtered through golden leaf canopies. Pools of water, long shots, volumetric lighting, architectural photography. So you'll see some repeats here. Oftentimes I'll do that. If I'm experimenting with an idea, maybe I'll change the setting, the context, or the scale, but use similar language to sort of see how the diffusion model interprets it. In this case, I got a lot of like greenery, I got a lot of light, sort of filtering through the greenery. I got a lot of reflective glass, reflecting all that greenery. It's sort of whatever stone that might be a part of this is sort of in the background here. So looks like it sort of interpreted that as stone panels, maybe some stone cladding on the inside here. Some sort of dimension stone to sort of work with the module of the glass. So anyway, you can see that again, this might not have been exactly what I had in my head, but it's what I asked for, which is interesting. And that's what I would liken this to, right? Like I would say oftentimes if you're here to just get a really controlled rendering of exactly what you had in mind, well, actually you're giving up control and you're not going to get exactly what you wanted, right? You will get what you asked for, but not what you wanted necessarily, right? And so I liken this process to sort of letting the diffusion model be a collaborator or a devil's advocate or somebody else that doesn't quite think just like you do, but will interpret your ideas and sometimes give you some surprise juxtapositions or some sort of counterintuitive results. If it extends your imagination, hopefully it's in ways that challenge what you had in your head originally, and maybe breaks down some of your preconceptions to help sharpen your ideas, right? So one way to look at this is I didn't think about it this way before, and now I am, which is kind of interesting. Or maybe I'm not describing it well enough, and so I need to go back and craft the language again in order to get something that's closer to what I had in mind, right? Either way, I can see this being a productive tool in an iterative sense, at the very early stages of your design thinking, right? The divergent thinking stage. All right, here's a very short prompt. An enormous undulating interior made from white plastic chopsticks. And again, that volumetric lighting. It's just kind of a joke at this point to add that at the end of these things. But and that's again a really weird thing, just like the feathers. Why would I pick white plastic chopsticks? I was actually not expecting this result at all. I wanted to see what would happen if I gave it some really small components aggregated into some really large space, right? And it didn't do that. It gave me the texture or some sort of qualities of chopsticks, namely this sort of long linear, in this case, arrayed vertically and then along these sort of vaults, sort of texture. But it sort of gave me just certain aspects of maybe the qualities of chopsticks, but without the literal chopsticks, which I thought was really interesting and weird and in an unexpected way. And then it made this undulating vaulted interiors or columns sort of soar up to the ceiling and turn around and become columns again as they meet the floor. It really kind of ignored the floor except for that top right one, which I think would be more interesting if we thought about this as a white plastic chopstick scape and rather just like a flat floor. And it gave me these sort of goofy windows in the background, that have nothing at all to do with this sort of undulating interior. So we'll talk more about that some of the things you can do within painting and DALL-E, you can start to clean some of these things up if you have some of those anomalies that you just absolutely don't want. Here's another one where, again, just sort of using a weird set of rules for the prompt and sort of see what you get out, and sort of wonderfully weird results. A complex interior made from the fluid geometry of paint. I was inspired by this artist I know and follow in New York named Kim Kiever, and his shtick is he has a large format camera that he takes these wonderful photos of through a tank of glass, and he has his assistants dump cans of paint into the water, and he takes these a constant series of photographs of the phenomenon of the viscosity of paint and different colors of paint mixing in with the water and mixing together. It's these fascinating compositions. I was inspired by that and thought maybe Midjourney could do something with it. This is completely different than that, but I like the results nonetheless. Sort of weird geometries and sort of mix of colors. I didn't tell it to go polychromatic, but as soon as it saw geometry of paint, it sort of interpreted it that way. So again, you'll see a lot of words that repeat here, and oftentimes I'll do this. I like to interrogate this as a tool. I almost see myself as just sort of conducting experiments with these things to sort of try to better understand what these tools can and can't do, or how they do things. So you'll see the word undulating again here, a monumental undulating space articulated by laminated wood strips. There are certain words that have a disproportionate effect on the outcomes that are given. Undulating is one of those words. It seems to really affect the geometry. So if you're looking for freeform geometry or something that you could maybe only do with sub-D geometry, then undulating is one of those words you're probably experimenting with in your prompts. In this case, I gave it a different type of wood component. I said laminated wood strips. I got something closer to what I was hoping it would do, which is to sort of look at this as a series of maybe serial components that could then be laminated together to create some sort of three-dimensional immersive whole, right? So, and again, it's sort of crazy, like, it puts it inside this normative box, with a glass ceiling, or where it puts these like ridiculous looking like normative windows in between these, imagine making this space and then putting that window in, like that would just be silly, right? So, but again, it's you get what you ask for. I'll keep coming back to that. Right? And so again, these are things that I would say, they sort of free you up to explore things that aren't necessarily practical or pragmatic to explore with a pencil or pen, maybe with a physical model, or even with a traditional digital workflow, trying to model something, then trying to add shaders to it, and then trying to render it, and then trying to post-produce it in Photoshop. These outputs come in, roughly 60 to 90 seconds. In this case, before I would ever try to buy a bunch of fiber optic cables and start trying to prototype things, I can basically experiment and try to figure out, well, where am I really going here? And before I really invest any time or money or materials or carbon into the process, right? So this one was an immersive spatial installation composed of undulating webs of fiber optic cables and translucent fabric hanging from the ceiling of a tall gallery and creating weird lighting and atmospheric effects. I actually just told it to create weird lighting and atmospheric effects. I can't believe I did that, but maybe I got sick of saying like, give me some light rays or some volumetric lighting, or make a dark contrasting space pierced with lighting effects or something like that. I just said weird, and that's just what it gives you. Complex interior made from inflated translucent latex membranes, again with that aspect ratio modifier. And again, like geometrically, it would take me a long time to actually model this and simulate that materiality, or those material qualities, both geometrically and then with how it renders out and plays with light, with this sort of inflated latex. And these were generated. Actually, I can say with great confidence, I was actually entered this prompt in in the middle of the desert, in the wilderness, out by a land art piece done by Michael Heiser. It's called Double Negative. It's north of Las Vegas. And so, within 90 seconds, I, had this idea, and later on, back when I got home, I was able to look at the results and experiment with them further. So I kind of liken this to the idea of a sort of sketchbook. You get an idea, but you're walking the dog or going grocery shopping or in the middle of class or something. Instead of fumbling around for your sketchbook and trying to sketch things out, another way of approaching this now is just thumb it out on your phone and check back in 1 or 2 minutes later, and you'll have a set of images that are interpreting your idea, through the AI model training. Let's see, we have a chat. And that is a quadruple negative. Indeed. All right. So, and again, you can have fun with these things, right? A photo of the interior of a vast vaulted structure made of driftwood. The structure is infinite. Volumetric lighting, light rays, photorealistic. And you'll see more modifiers here, like ultra realistic, Corona render, 8K. There's a lot of things going on in this prompt that are different than the other prompts. Let me explain that. So this was from version 3 model of Midjourney. So that's 2 or 3 models ago. And back then it seemed like the thing to try was to, again, in order to evoke more and more words from its training, we would put things like photorealistic or, try to get things as photorealistic as possible. We might throw in some sort of rendering engines that it might have come across when it was scraping the internet for images and metadata, attach those images to sort of evoke, let's say, photorealistic rendering, 8K to talk about the quality, et cetera, right? Then we have these double colons in between separating these things. You can still do that in Midjourney. Back then, it seemed like you could sort of you could separate distinct clauses in your prompts and separate them in a certain way so that you could sort of prioritize them. And then even with these colons, I could have then put numbers in front of each clause in order to give weight to them. So I could put, let's say, a 4 in front of the first clause, a 2 in front of the second clause, maybe a 1 in front of the last clause. And then what that would do is that would sort of give a weight of 4 to the first, and then a weight of 2, and a weight of 1. The greater the number, the greater the weight, right? So that seems to be less of a thing with the newer models, Model 4 and version 5 as well. So, but I did include that just as an example so you can see that. And again, you can sort of, here's an example of another really long prompt, right? I don't know why I have this many varies in this at the very beginning. It says very, 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 very highly detailed epic photo. Not just a photo, but an epic photo. A dense metropolis with Art Deco buildings. Film noir. I think I put Fritz Lang in here. Put some other artists in here. Trinity on Art Station. Photorealistic, incredible depth. Sepia, monochromatic. Filmic, concept art, dystopian, moody, futuristic, mysterious, etc. Right? Dystopian is something that comes in here a couple of times actually. Right, in order to sort of give this what could be maybe a film poster for Metropolis. That was the idea anyway. And that's an example of just sort of throwing a lot of words at a prompt. Sometimes I'll start simple and then keep adding. Sometimes I'll start with a really long prompt and then start to subtract. Again, from my vantage point, you can be very prolific and sort of building up a large amount of images in a very short amount of time. So I like to sort of vary the prompts and sort of I like tweaking the language in order to see what the outputs are, right? Here's a similar example, but using a different prompt. So in this case, I pared it down to retro-futuristic buildings with dappled lighting, Art Deco, Metropolis, monochromatic, film noir, Hasselblad, which is a type of camera, digital matte painting, which again, sort of a way of doing a static backdrop for film, back when they did practical effects, incredible depth and hyperrealism, photorealistic, etc. Fritz Lang still in there, the director of Metropolis. But you can see that, there's lots of different ways to get to the same point, right? And so again, the thing here about this is sort of wordsmithing, right? Coming up with different ways to sort of describe and different words to describe what you're going after, both in terms of subject, but also in mood, in terms of mood, atmospherics, weight, material, texture, pattern, setting, program, all of these things I think are fertile substrate to sort of experiment with, right? Here's another example prompt: organically shaped office of the future overlooking atrium made from glass and stone, with parks and plants, glowing computer screens, modern office tables and seating, voluminous light and light rays, extremely intricate, very detailed. I threw in Norman Foster, Bjarke Ingels, and Zaha Hadid in here for some silly reason. Probably so I didn't get rectilinear things, like totally rectilinear things, but I got some curvature in there. And then an aspect ratio of 3:2, meaning 3 in width and 2 in height. So we get the sort of a wider shot, right? And this is great. I kind of like the lighting and the color qualities in these things. Midjourney loves color. It really seems to have a nice sensibility to it. So when it comes to color and lighting and those sorts of things, let's see. I only have maybe a few more examples here, so don't worry. I'm not going to talk at you the whole time, but I appreciate your patience while we go through these. Here's another example prompt, really short one, nevertheless still a very provocative output, right? This is just a neighborhood of organically shaped pathways and balconies in style of Zaha Hadid. And it does quite look like it lifted some of the ideas from some of her projects. And, perhaps I can think of at least one or two in China that sort of resemble at least the bifurcation and section in and plan that we sort of see here. So, and probably after this, I probably modified and added things to the prompt for more results. I probably started saying, oh, and the sidewalks are full of people and cyclists and children playing, and someone's flying a kite and there's birds flying through the air, and try to make it as your maybe some hot air balloons or something, right? Like the most positive render that you've ever seen in your life, right? You can do that with words, right? Very quickly. So all right. And so let me just exit out of here and let me just show you before we get to the Mad Libs part of the workshop. And you guys can still see my screen, I hope. So I just want to show you how this works really, really simply. This is Discord, but before we start typing some things out, any questions or comments or anything like that? I mean, it sort of limitations of Zoom and instead of being there in person with you guys, but I'm certainly open if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to add. Once you get a happy accident with a vague prompt, how do you drill down into it specifically? Oh, yes. Okay. Well, that's a great question. So, and let me just show you here. Like, for instance, here's a prompt I used. It's another fluid geometry of paint, but using the version 5 model. So I said a tall, complex interior made from the fluid geometry of paint. This is a great happy accident. I looked at that last night and said, wow, I am so going to use this for my workshop tomorrow. And I'll probably throw it into the Pechakucha for Neil and all those other things also tomorrow. And so I can just simply copy and paste and rerun it, right? So let me just show you what this looks like. I'm going to go ahead and type in /imagine, right? And what that does is that tells the Midjourney bot I want to run a prompt. It tells me, or it asks me, okay, well, what kind of text do you want to put in here? So I'm just going to go ahead and paste a tall, complex interior made from the fluid geometry of paint. So I'll just run this really once, really quickly. and we'll start to see some results. I might also, again, sort of, I always try to keep this going. I might sort of change a few things. A tall, complex interior made from the fluid geometry of paint. And I might add a comma, and then I'll start to give it some more descriptions. I'll say mysterious lighting and some scale figures standing in the midground. We'll just type that out, see what that does. We can always compare the results. You can see that basically it takes my words, it takes all of these words, it runs them through its latent space. It picks a seed of noise or Gaussian noise or static, and then it slowly denoises the static into the image, right? It looks like it's done now with this first prompt, and there's some of the results. You can see you get a weird mix of fluid geometry and then of paint, color, and then some like, looks like kind of like a neoclassical sort of thing with columns and sort of looks almost like it's trying to be ornate, but the material ornament stripped away only to have this sort of runny paint running down the walls. I'm kind of curious to see what the second one does, but let's say I want to look at one of these in particular. Let's look at this bottom right one, right? This is the fourth one. I'm going to go ahead and upscale that. In other words, I'll make it larger. And now I can make variations off of that. And not only can I make variations off of that, but I can make variations off of it and also make tweaks to the prompt as well. So let's say I say a tall, complex interior made from the fluid geometry of paint with a dance troupe performing, right? So I'll just sort of add program here with some scaled figures, hopefully performing some sort of, well, in this case, literally performing a dance performance. All right, so we can take the same prompt. I used it before, and I just added mysterious lighting and some scale figures standing in the midground. You can see I got something different, right? So similar prompt, I added some different words. Mysterious seemed to really, again, disproportionately affect the results, right? This is starting to look, certainly looking very mysterious. And the lack of lighting starts to strip away some of the color here. Yeah, so kind of interesting. And then it gave me some people walking around. So that's interesting to see. Now, here are the variations that I just made. And it's trying. I'm not sure I'm convinced by the humans in these yet. Oh, bizarre. But you can see that there's lots of different ways you could begin to iterate off of these things. You could go back to the first principles of tweaking the language. You could begin to give variations, make variations off of the images themselves. You can re-roll the prompt, just get lots of different results. And you can even both generate variations off of an image, as well as changing the text. So there's lots of, there's a little more freedom to this process than when we first started here. They've sort of incorporated some of these things as we went. But the style of, so you can train or retrain the program based on specific examples you feed it, or is this something pre-programmed? Great question, Miguel. So Midjourney is already trained. So when the model's released, it's trained and weighted accordingly. So when the things that you write in your prompt, you're basically querying its training data, right? So it basically boils down everything it learned from destroying images into static and then reversing that process, static back to the image, with all the metadata intact. You're basically querying its training. All that training's been boiled down to a bunch of algebra, basically a series of Markov chains, so that it can, from scratch, from any sort of seed of static, begin to generate something like an apple or a tree, or in this case, a tall, complex interior made from the fluid geometry of paint, right, with dancers underneath or something like that, right? So you're basically you're not retraining it, and with Midjourney you're never going to retrain it. It's already trained. It's pre-trained. So to answer your question, and that's to sort of answer your question in short, the longer answer is you're only going to get, like if you say in the style of, let's say, Zaha Hadid, you're only going to you're only going to get you're only going to see influence from that clause in your prompt if it understood and was trained on, let's say, images that were meta tagged with Zaha Hadid in them, right? Or you know, the famous example when these diffusion models first came out was sort of you know, turning your photograph into the style of, you know, Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night or something like that, right? So, you know, if it's been trained on and saw a lot of Van Gogh paintings, for instance, right, then and knows who Van Gogh is, then you can begin to do these sorts of things, right? If I said in the style of Josh Vermillion, you would not see a darn bit of I'm not famous, right? So you know, it wouldn't really show up as something. It would just ignore it, right? That part of it, because it wouldn't have enough data to sort of, you know, talk about who I am or what do I look like or what my work looks like or something like that, right? So now there's also a second aspect, so sort of again to touch on your question, Miguel, and that is you can't really retrain the model here locally in Midjourney, but you can give it image prompts, right? So you can give it prompts to sort of talk about the aesthetics of what you're going for, whether that's the color or the geometries of an existing composition. So let's rerun that. That's a great segue into Imagine. All right, here's my prompt. So I can say, let's say, I can rerun a tall, complex interior. Made from the fluid my brain is in typing mode today, apparently, of paint, right? And I'm just going to copy and paste that, or copy that so I can paste it again if I need it later. But what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to insert an image URL at the beginning of this prompt. Okay. And that's going to give it also an image as part of the prompt, right? To sort of for it to reference and draw off of. So before I run this prompt, I'm just going to go to my downloads folder and I'm just going to drag an image in here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw in an image that I've already made and message that to the bot. Now that image is in Discord, it has a URL, so I can click on it and say copy the link. All right, now I'm ready to rerun this prompt and I'll paste that link in. Right, there's the link. And now I'm going to go back to my text prompt. I'm going to say a tall, complex interior made from fluid geometry paint. All right. And so hopefully the results will probably have some similar color scheme to this, but it'll also have sort of reconfigure this interior to look like it's sort of drippy paint and that's sort of mixed together in this sort of weird marbled way that it's been doing, right? Yeah. So, you know, I'm hoping to get some sort of blend between this and then the image that I gave it. So that's one way you could begin to sort of not train it, the model, but you can sort of get a little more control over this. And we'll talk about blend and more image prompting here towards the end of the demonstrations. I'm just sort of want to see how this defuzzes and comes out, how it looks when it gets cleared up. So what if it in the style of some newbie designer without much on? Yeah. So yeah, then it won't really have much of an effect over the prompt, right? So if the model doesn't know who Joshua Vermillion is, then you know, invoking my name won't really have much effect over the prompt at all. So you can see that it's sort of a weird mix of the, you know, similar geometry, this sort of, again, these columns and sort of freeform interior with the same, lots of similar color schemes, but maybe a little more of the marbling and less of the sort of what looks like maybe colored blown glass or something from the original image, right? So it's sort of mixing and matching and pulling what it wants to from both the description for the text and then also from the image that I gave it. And if I don't like the results, I can always just re-roll it. Again, I can just rerun it. And it'll pick a different seed of static and it'll rerun, right? So that's what I'm doing right now. I can re-roll. I can create variations off of each of these. I can upscale them to make them larger, to sort of look at them more closely. And that's kind of how the interface works. You're basically just chatting back and forth with direct messages with the Midjourney bot in Discord, right? For those of you who just joined, if you're in the Midjourney server, I'll do this. I'll show this while my thing is destaticking, denoising. They'll refer you. This is the Midjourney server. They'll refer you to one of the newbie channels, right? And what you can do is you can find, this is like a bunch of new people are like running prompts all at once, and this thing starts to jump around. It becomes really messy. What you can do is you can find the Midjourney bot. You can right click and say, I want to just message the Midjourney bot, and then you can start your own DM thread, your direct message thread with your Midjourney bot. So likewise, you can start your own server. I have a number of servers over here in Discord where, depending on which group I'm talking to, like I think next weekend I'm in DC, the next weekend, so I'll be doing some things there. The weekend after that, I'll be doing a workshop with some folks in Mumbai. So I always create servers for these things, and then they have a sort of post-workshop resource at their disposal. You guys are recording this, so that's fine by me, and I'll send some links to some resources to Kevin that he can share with you guys. So yeah, you can start to see, you can start to get a sort of mixture of results. I can just keep rerunning this and then creating variations off of these. Or I can go back to this and say, maybe it's not a tall interior, maybe it's a long, shallow interior, whatever. You can start to mix up the words and start to see what the results turn out. Okay, let me just try to stay on track here really quickly. So one of the things I usually do is, I'm sure you've all heard of the game Mad Libs, right? Where you pick a noun, you pick a verb, you pick, a certain set of words, and you put them together. All these disparate things creates a sort of weird sort of prose story or something like that. In this case, we could do that with prompts. So oftentimes what I'll do is I'll have folks start with like name a type of space or program. It doesn't matter if it matches up with whatever geometric spatial characteristics you want to pick. Maybe that's organic or angular or tall or, whatever. Describe a lighting situation. Give us some mood words. It could be gloomy or somber. It could be airy, celebratory. Describe a use or human occupant, right? If you describe a human occupant, then, see if it can at least hint to the model, like what that person might be doing. An artist might be, making art, a dancer might be performing, and a cyclist might be riding a bicycle, etc. Right? So again, it sort of hints at program, and describe at least one object occupying the scene. It could be furniture, plants, it could be abstract things, a certain shape, a platonic solid or primitive, right? Or maybe it's describing something, I've gotten, sometimes it's really interesting to sort of say grid or matrix or so throw something like that in there, some sort of ordering system that I can react to. And then the question is, how does it apply grid or matrix? Does it apply to the way the lighting's coming through a window? Does it apply it to the geometric characteristics you give it? Or does it, et cetera, right? Like sometimes you get the surprises and the happy accidents are more interesting than what you were thinking of originally, right? So I don't know how might be the easiest way to do this over Zoom, but why don't we do this right now? Let's maybe I have a pen and paper here, and maybe we can Mad Libs this, it's kind of let's see. This could be a complete disaster. I have no clue, but at least for those of you in is it AB 202, if you guys want to maybe shout out some potential spaces or programs, right? And then maybe Kevin wouldn't mind dictating those to us or getting on the microphone and telling me. Maybe we can quickly write some collective prompts and run them really quickly and see what happens. And for those of you who are just zoomed in or sorry, logged in over Zoom, feel free to do this exercise. Yeah, let's use chat. That sounds fine. Feel free to do this exercise right there in Discord on your own. Type of space or program. Anybody throwing out some interesting, and we can do better than museum or atrium, right? We've already seen a bunch of examples like that, right? I'm not hearing or seeing any chat. Let's see. I'd throw in maybe aquarium would be a good option. What else? Public plaza. Landscape. All right. Oh, yeah. Okay. Midjourney loves landscape. All right. I'll even I'll even chip in with that landscape. How about a desert landscape, like a landform, like a slot canyon? Yeah. All right. 2 geometric spatial characteristics. And again, these don't have to obviously line up with any of the program that we said. Midwestern is better landscape. All right, if you say so. Let's see, 2 geometric spatial characteristics. I'm not sure who all is participating here. Geometric. We can go with spiky. I'll throw in one. What else? Curvilinear. All right. Spiky and curvilinear. Why not? And then it'll be up to me to remember how to spell curvilinear later. Describe the lighting. Dappled, bright, dim. Dark and moody. All right. Excellent. Name 2 mood words, right? Like so let's come up with some more words that sort of build on dark and moody. I don't want to use the ones that are written down, like gloomy or somber. Dystopian, maybe. All right. If you come up with more, just type them in. Describe a use or human occupants. I was at Architecton. It's a firm out in Phoenix. It does actually really great work. Janitor. They came up with clowns. It was like this. It was really creepy. I'll be honest. I'm not a fan of clowns. I thought it was at least better than mimes. I don't think anybody likes mimes. All right, describe at least one object occupying the scene, abstract things or specific things. Pyramid. All right. Okay. Now I think just sort of thinking about these words, we have aquarium, public plaza, or landscape, right? So let's go with the landscape. I'm going to try slot canyon, and you guys can try rolling prairies or cornfields or hardwood forests or limestone quarries or whatever landform landscape you want, wherever that's situated. I have spiky, curvilinear, dark, moody, dystopian, janitor, and pyramid. All right, so feel free to try this back at your phone or laptop as well, but I'm just going to try this out really quickly. So let's go with, I'll start with Slot Canyon in Mojave Desert with arroyo flowing through desert plants. You know what? Instead of saying in desert plants, I'm going to say spiky desert plants. You know, you have to be a really mean plant to thrive in the Mojave Desert. And oftentimes they look mean. They look spiky. So that moody. And in fact, I'm going to say dramatic monsoon. The desert gets rain, called monsoons. monsoon sky, moody, dramatic monsoon sky, dystopian. I'm not even going to try to string this into a complete sentences yet. Janitor picking up trash. And pyramids. Why not? Pyramid or pyramid? I'll try pyramid first. All right. And of course, at this point, I can copy and paste. And I like to mix and match things here. So I always try to get these things to run in parallel. Instead of Slot Canyon and Mojave Desert with an arroyo flowing through it, I'm going to say limestone quarry. With a pool of water at the bottom. Not spiky desert plants. I'll just put spiky. Why not? Dramatic monsoon sky. Moody. Let's see here. Dystopian. I'll say post-industrial. Maybe that brings up some sort of interesting imagery from its training. And yeah, pyramid of stacked quarry blocks. You know, you get those quarry blocks, they extract them, and instead of slicing them down like loaves of bread, they see there's some spalls in them. They don't really want them. They just stack them up, right? It's like southern Indiana is full of these sort of stacked pyramids of unused quarry blocks, it seems like, right? Even on the side of the highways. All right, so there's my desert setting. And I'm kind of curious to see where my limestone quarry comes out. All right. Can you share images in the Zoom chat? If so, it might be interesting to sort of see some of the sharing, like share some of the outputs coming out. I'd liken this, sometimes it's like there's the good and the bad and the ugly. Are there particular strengths and weaknesses of Midjourney and Stable Diffusion? How they compare in your work? Great question, Brad. So did everybody see that question that Brad asked in the chat? Brad Johnson writes, are there particular strengths and weaknesses of Midjourney and Stable Diffusion? How do they compare in your work? So Midjourney and Stable Diffusions are two different, well, they're two diffusion models. Midjourney actually runs partially on the Stable Diffusion model itself, but has a different sort of flavor with different weightings and slightly different, I guess, training regimen. I don't know what you even say. I don't even understand the process entirely myself. And so Brad's asking, what's the differences between these different models, these various models? So that's an excellent question. How do they compare in your work? Let's talk a little bit about that really quickly. Well, you're right. This is actually much more interesting than the desert landscape, this limestone quarry with pyramids. What a weird combination of stuff. And I'm actually this sort of post-industrial landscape of people inhabiting these pyramids of quarry blocks and rafting around the pools, I guess, going fishing or something. It's kind of a weird thing, right? What a happy accident. I'm going to experiment with that further. One of our colleagues also in the Midwest, Carl Dobman, who is the dean at Lawrence Tech, I think, right now, and used to teach at University of Michigan. He has a account where he does a lot of Midjourney experiments, but he calls it Robot Historian, and this kind of reminds me of the sort of stories he's telling through Midjourney on his Instagram account right now, Robot Historian. So anyway, this sort of post-industrial landscape, or I guess, yeah. Anyway, so let's see. Right, back to the question of these different models. So right now I'm using Midjourney, and you can sort of see the results. And there's also different models of Midjourney, and they all look different. And I would call it the walled garden, right? You pay a subscription, and it just works, right? It's kind of like the Apple App Store, right? As long as you don't mind there being banned words and things you can't do, it's really great at what it does, right? Stable Diffusion, another diffusion model, and the other one that Brad mentions, is an open source diffusion model, right? So you can actually download the model and run it locally on your machine. Now you have to have a screaming fast video card in order to run it on your machine in any kind of really feasible way. So you need lots of VRAM. But if you have that, you can actually download it, run it for free on your machine locally. There's ways to try to do some local training with that model as well. I mean, there's already a trained model, but you can actually do local training with it. And because it's open source, there's an active user community developing third-party apps for it. So when you see things like the diffusion model being put into Photoshop or being used in Blender as a sort of plugin, those are usually using Stable Diffusion because again, they can it's sort of open to an API that you can actually start to develop things and make it talk nicely with, let's say, the Adobe products or the McNeil product, Rhino, or Blender, other open source projects, right? And so let me think about this. When Stable Diffusion first came out, it actually ran over it ran on top of Stable Diffusion as well, and it was free. Let me find it. It was the Gigabot. And so instead of saying imagine, you'd say dream, and you would get different results, right? Less painterly results than, let's say, Midjourney, maybe more photorealistic results. In order to get certain aesthetics, you really had to craft the prompts, right? So there wasn't like a Midjourney, like a Stable Diffusion aesthetic, like there was a Midjourney aesthetic. And so here's me doing oil paintings of my Maltese puppy dog or something. Here's Cybernetic City, highly detailed oil painting and pastel brush strokes. Cyberpunk color palette, dramatic composition, blah, blah, blah. Name drop some artists in order to try to get what you're going for, right? And then you could even elaborate further with like the type of color scheme you'd want. So if you know color theory, you could say, triadic color scheme with red, yellow, and blue, and you start to get these sort of various results. And some of them were more or less dynamic. Some of them were more or less legible, right? Again, when you break the square composition, then you're sort of pulling the diffusion models out of their comfort zone, and sometimes they sort of tile things in weird ways. So if you're into glitch arts and those sorts of things, this is another, some things like this are then like one step away from then running a maybe a pixel sorting algorithm to them, and starting to sort of play around back and forth with some Photoshop, and then maybe bring it back into the diffusion model as an image prompt, etc. So I'm going to get to your question just in a minute, Miguel. Yeah, so here I was just experimenting with several different prompts, tequila bottle concept art. Let's see, dwellings built in the landscape, the desert landscape on the hill. Just sort of trying to play around with how these things might actually manifest themselves, right? And honestly, I don't know why I was even doing this. I could easily do this in Rhino and it wouldn't take long, right? But that landscape looks pretty hot, doesn't it? Anyway, so and then there's another really common diffusion model. I'll just move over to my browser here. So DALL-E 2, which is developed by OpenAI. They're also the company that developed ChatGPT. Right, DALL-E. I'll get to the questions here in just a minute. I want to finish this question that Brad asked first. DALL-E 2 works with the web interface. You can again type in a prompt and hit generate, and it gives you images. And I don't really care so much for DALL-E as much as I like the other diffusion models. I like Midjourney probably the best at the moment. What I like about DALL-E is this feature. If I go here and I go to try out painting and open the editor, look at this. This is almost like magic when I first saw this. Okay, I guess the last thing I uploaded was letter recommendation. So I'm just going to input an image here, and I'm going to place it And now I'm going to drag this frame over. And I could do something called outpainting. So now I can drag this frame over. I've given this image. I move the frame over, let's say over here. And I'm going to type in a prompt, like just try sort of, describe what I want to see. So a festive atmosphere, nighttime atmosphere, people feasting in a romantic alleyway. I don't know how you spell alleyway. I guess it's that. Okay. Under brightly colored lanterns, right? So go ahead and hit generate. What you can do is you can begin to expand the image outwards, right? You can outpaint, you can start to world build in the X and Y axis here. So let's say it cropped off something that you didn't like, or you want to make this image into a sort of landscape image. It'll use AI, it'll try to interpret and continue on the image in perpetuity and start to pick up things from the prompt. It gives you 4 choices to sort of pick from, right? It's depending on, I mean, that I don't know what happened to that guy. Maybe the food poisoning or something, right? To sort of continue on the scene, right? And on top of that, like, let's say I wanted to change something here. Let's say I wanted to put a scale figure here in the foreground. I can erase. And then inside of that, I can say, let's see, person standing with a beer bottle at a festive nighttime atmosphere. People, okay, so and let's see if it'll pop, if it'll just sort of fill in, you know, the scaled figure, a person with a beer bottle or something like that. I'm not sure if that's the best use of my text prompt, but whatever. So you can also inpaint, and oh, it's telling me the service overloaded request. That happens now. Let's see if it goes through again. So yeah, so this is another way of sort of a different way of what I would traditionally call Photoshop post-processing, of adding things inside of the scene. Maybe it's adding entourage, silhouette, scale figures, cleaning things up, or adding something in the foreground that wasn't there, or switching out the background or something like that. You can begin to do these things using the power of AI. And of course, if anybody's used the, you know, some of the more recent versions of the Adobe Creative Cloud, Photoshop, they have neural filters. They also have content-aware tools that are all leveraging AI in some way to help you out and sort of speed up your workflows, right? Whether it's clipping out a figure from the background, or whether it's upscaling something to try to increase the resolution, or to try to decrease the blurriness, or to try to get rid of artifacts and noise and things like that. Oh, it's really disappointing. Perfect standing person standing with a glass giving a toast. Let's see if it goes here. I'm not going to belabor this too long. We'll see. Just want to see if this finishes. I'd actually like to export this out as just a memory of this workshop. So nothing. That guy just looks maybe had too many glasses. Yeah, okay, never mind then. That was lame. All right, and like I said, sometimes the results in DALL-E are a little of a different quality than Midjourney, I would say. And then Adobe came out with Firefly, which is their version of the diffusion model. It just came out last over my spring break, so mid-March. Last week I got the beta invite. And this is what it looks like. It's a web interface. You can generate text to image. You can try to do text effects. Coming soon, it looks like you can start to recolor vector art if you're bringing something back and forth from Illustrator. It looks like so. It looks like they're trying to introduce a suite of tools that can work hand in hand with their Creative Cloud. Whether these things start to get integrated in with their with their existing apps or standalone sort of web interface things will remain to be seen. It looks like they have some catching up to do, and I was playing around with the text to image. I mean, really quickly, I'm actually really enamored with this limestone quarry result. As usual, I get stuck. I just look at what Kevin Klinger's up to, and that gets me unstuck. So he's the one that's the Midwest landscape. So limestone quarry blocks came immediately to mind. Let's see what happens here. And you can maybe see the difference, right? So you can see there's clearly a difference in how Adobe's diffusion model is working than, let's say, Midjourney's, right? And that's not uncommon when it comes to the different diffusion models. You have to write the prompts differently. They all have their own biases. They all have their own weights. They all do things differently. But I hope that maybe begins to address your question, Brad. There's a lot of flavors out there to try. Some of them are free. Some of them cost money. Some of them are open source. So depending on the ethos that you purchase with, as well as your budget, there are options out there, and there are more coming online all the time. Great question. So to Miguel and then Kevin, piggybacking off of Miguel's questions, Miguel asked a really stupid question here. I'm trying to run a prompt. I'm doing something wrong for the newbies. Let's go back to step 0. Yes, absolutely. Now that we know what we're kind of doing, let's go back and make sure everybody's can do it, right? Starting from home at the Midjourney window. And then free newbies seem to have limits. Do you recommend paying for a subscription? Yeah, if you want to continue to use Midjourney without limits, I believe it's a $30 a month subscription. With limits, some limits, but reasonable limits, it's $10 a month. Or you can just keep creating burner accounts on your Discord and just keep using the free 25 versions, yeah, but whatever. I mean, I'm not a shill for any of these models or companies. If there was a way to that's where Stable Diffusion comes in. That's a model that is actually free and open source. Although there are paid versions of it, because if you're not running it locally, then you're running it on somebody else's server farm. Then you have to sort of pay for that access, the number of hours that you're using. All right, so back to Miguel's question. Let's go back. I'm in Discord right now, and when you first start, you go to the Midjourney server, and you'll see all these channels, and there's lots of things going on. If you're using one of the noobs channels, then you'll type in your prompt, and then but it'll jump around because everybody, there's maybe hundreds, if not even thousands of people at the same time, all typing in prompts and getting the results back, right? Hopefully nothing too racy shows up here on this. Let's see. So jump to present. And so what I recommend doing is in Discord, what I recommend doing is finding the Midjourney bot, right? When the Midjourney bot returns an image in the chat to somebody, you'll see it, Midjourney bot, and you click on them, and you can say, let's see, how do I message them? I right click on it, and I can say message, right? And so Discord is basically just a messaging app anyway, for groups. And so what you're doing is you're saying, Midjourney bot is the only person I want to talk to here. So I'm going to send the Midjourney bot a direct message, and it'll take you to your direct messages server. And then you'll see the Midjourney bot here, and you can message the Midjourney bot directly in your own thread with it, like your messages app on your iPhone, right? So this is how I'm working. And then what I do is I can type in /, and that's how I bring up the menu of commands I can use in Midjourney to talk to the Midjourney bot directly. So if I want to just run a prompt, I say /imagine. It'll IntelliSense that I'm trying to type in imagine, and I can actually select it here. And then I can type in my text prompt. And I'm going to rerun this limestone quarry one. Strangely, I don't see a juror with a mop. Whenever a janitor with a mop. Whenever I see the word janitor, I immediately think of, this is going to date me, I immediately think of Nirvana's first music video. Smells Like Teen Spirit. I had this janitor guy. I don't know. Anyway, janitor picking up trash, pyramid of stacked box, and let's see, post-industrial. I'll just rerun that. Right. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm doing. I'm sending a direct message, and then I work in my direct messages thread here with the bot, right? So you always have to type in that /imagine, and then you can type in whatever you want. Well, mostly whatever you want. That's something to bring up while we're waiting on this thing to denoise. Midjourney does have banned words, right? So, you know, you could probably use Midjourney and try to do things that aren't so good or pleasant, and aren't contributing to society in a positive way. So, you know, I think there's certain banned words to prevent you from, you know, trying to make compromising images of somebody that's real, or, you know, those sorts of things, or something that's just really grotesquely violent. And they're closed walled garden, so they, you know, they're a private company, they can do that. So if you're looking to use some of these tools without any limits at all, let's say you have a libertarian bent to your thinking or work, then the open source Stable Diffusion is running locally on your machine is probably the way to go, right? Does Midjourney do analysis most frequently used prompts? They say they do. And in fact, let me just scroll. If you can see my Discord, you can actually favorite and rate, and you can also make things your favorites. You can rate the outputs as you go. So you can give things a rating, and that helps them sort of better understand how the model is being used, and how to tweak things, how to reweight things as they go. Sorry, I'm just taking a bite of a sandwich. It's sitting right here. I haven't had a chance to eat today. These are great questions. What else is popping up that might be helpful before we move forward with some things? Well, I don't see anything right away, but take a minute or two to collect any more questions before we move on. But in the meantime, you can see that I went up, and you can see that I have a set of settings here. When I opened my settings right before this workshop. So let me show you some of these other commands. We've talked about /imagine to talk to the bot. But if I say / and I say settings, then what it does is it brings up a set of settings I can toggle back and forth. And so I might have mentioned this before, but if not, you know, when Midjourney first came out, it had a version 1, and then, you know, the second version came out, and the third model came out, and the fourth version of the model came out, and then the fifth model of the version of the model came out not too long ago. There's also some other different modes, version modes, Niji mode, the test photo mode. All of these are different flavors, right? And starting from the earliest to the latest, and a few in between that sometimes privilege more like photorealism, or that photo more of a stylized aesthetic. And you can feel free to test these. You can always go back and say, oh, actually, I like Midjourney version 3 because, you know, it gave me results that had this sort of weird texture, and you know, sometimes the results were a little more ambiguous. They were less baked in. It was more like a sketch where, you know, my imagination could kick in, right? And so you can go back and forth between the different versions just to sort of see the difference. In fact, why don't I run this prompt, and I'll run it in all 5 versions just so you can sort of see the differences. So I'll switch it to Midjourney version 1, and I'll run this prompt. All right, so and then I'll switch it to Midjourney version 2. Now I'll rerun this prompt again. There we go. So I have obviously the unlimited $30 a month plan. So I like run prompts with reckless abandon. I mean, like, you know, if design is a narrative exercise, then as far as I'm concerned, interrogating AI needs to be an iterative exercise. So but this is like the feedback loop on steroids, Kevin. So let's see, there's version 1. It's starting to denoise, and it's a little slower than some of the others. And so let's see how this works. Version 3, right? We can see that in the modifiers, it's telling us which version is which. All right. So while that's happening, I try to keep things going, right? It's like a cooking show. Like I put something in the oven, but I'm also taking something out that's already been cooked. So you can talk about half quality, base quality, high quality. That relates to how many times it's sort of running the denoise and the running it through the algorithm to sort of give you an image. It also directly relates to how many GPU hours you're using on the Midjourney servers. So that there's also a cost equated with that, right? So again, I always just run things at twice the cost because I don't care. I'm having a unlimited plan. Style, low, medium, high, style, very high. The style refers to how much do you want, how literal and how close do you want the diffusion model to stick to the text prompt, or how much what it calls style, how much do you want it to ad lib, right, and get away from the prompt and add its own aesthetic to things. So I'm keeping in mind it's style medium. If I went style low, then that would give more weight to the prompt. If I went style very high, it would give less weight to the prompt and more weight to the diffusion model, and it's sort of bias for whatever sort of aesthetic it puts into these things, right? And then last but not least, there's fast mode and relax mode, remix mode, stealth mode, and public mode. So with public mode, all of my results end up public. Stealth mode, if you have the full subscription, you can keep your results private. I don't really care about that so much. Fast mode and relax mode. Fast mode means that every time you are running a prompt, you're sort of prioritized. Relax mode, which is what I run usually when I'm not doing a workshop. I usually just run in relax mode. Might take a couple seconds longer, but you have an unlimited amount of hours in relax mode. Remix mode I have toggled on. So that way when I run a variation, that's what it brings up, that box to allow me to remix the prompt if I want to sort of tweak the text prompt before I run the variations. Right. So there's lots of settings to play around with here. And you might remember what I'm saying about all of these different settings. You might not. But if you just remember one thing, it's that you type in /settings, and then it brings these things up and you can start to play around with them and experiment with them yourself. Right. And that's what I recommend doing. Right. I mean, let's see here. So where's version 1? Version 1 looks kind of rough. Ooh. Right. And then version 2 is interesting. Kind of crazy though, like the perspective and the elevation, sometimes they look a little off, right? There's not as much coherence, you might say. Version 3 was a really great model. I think everybody, when they first saw Midjourney, liked the version 3 model because again, it had that painterly effect. And then when it did things that had some ambiguity to them geometrically, it was kind of seen as a good, nice thing, something where your imagination could take over. Let's see, things weren't baked in too much. This looks like version 4. That would be my guess. And then version 5. Man, version 5 is so hot. Look at that. Oh, that's some pure diffusion model goodness right there. So that's just the going through the various models. Again, I can always go back to my settings or toggle those settings again, and switch things around as I need to, right? So further on the feedback loop, say AI can be used to make decisions and input back into itself. I noticed Andrew doing some interrogation on script writing too. So while you're doing interesting animation with scripts, what other potentials can you see having AI write scripts for you? Yeah, so where's my browser? So yeah, there's again with Stable Diffusion, there's lots of third-party plugins and lots of people developing ways of using the diffusion models. Andrew Yeah, I'll just pull up Instagram here. And I'll bring up Andrew Matsis. Here we go. Who, by the way, I mean, is not only like really incredible, but also this person. Let me go to his reels so you can sort of see some of the things that maybe Kevin is mentioning here. So one of the things you can do with ControlNet, which is something that can run over Stable Diffusion, is it can start to trace edges and give you more control. You can begin to interpolate between prompts and then animate the frames in between to generate these sort of videos. And these things can be run locally on your computer, again, if you have the VRAM, or you can run them on Google Colabs. If you have an account through Google Colabs, then you can run them sort of remotely on Google's servers. I'm not exactly sure what Andrew's doing here, where he's running this, but I know he's using ControlNet, Stable Diffusion. ControlNet can sort of either parse images based off of a Z-depth, like if you run a Z-depth rendering of, like, let's say a Rhino model or a Maya model, or you can give it an image and it can sort of trace the edges and sort of breaks down the image and sort of understands things that way. If you're interested in that, Carlos Bannon actually gave a fantastic tutorial a couple of weeks ago on Digital Futures World that shows how ControlNet works. And it's really fascinating because he's going back and forth between a digital model and then in this case Stable Diffusion to then render things out in a really sort of robust way. If I go to mine, I've been using ChatGPT. I think it's really lame to try to use ChatGPT to write essays, although I've used it to, like, I've pumped in drafts of my essays and, like, let's see what it does. Let's see if it can sort of understand my voice and then, like, you know, or proofread my essay for me or something like that. What I think is really interesting is to see how well it can script and write scripts. So what I've been doing, let me just get to ChatGPT, and hopefully its servers aren't overloaded at the moment. I found that ChatGPT can get really busy and just sort of say bug off for a while because there's too many people trying to use it. Sorry, I thought I was already logged in here. Let's try. And again, I don't want to bore you guys to death, but I'm not sure why it's not opening here. I have to verify I'm not a robot. Although I think AI could probably figure out those CAPTCHA things now by now, I think. So, you know, so here's what ChatGPT looks like. Again, I'd be surprised if most of the people in the room haven't at least seen this, or if not tried it out on your own. I hope you try things out on your own. You know, I think that's the important thing, is to sort of be a critical user of these things, not just consuming them uncritically. But, you know, you basically can start to have a conversation with ChatGPT. Here's an example. Let's see. But trying to get it to write Python scripts or Mel scripts or Rhino scripts or processing scripts, or C#, if you want to make it to be able to run a let's say a custom Grasshopper widget or something like that. So, you know, what you can do is you can say, write a processing script that generates circles that slowly appear and then slowly disappear with a ripple effect, and then tries its best to do that. It says, here's an example of a processing script that generates circles that slowly appear and then disappear with a ripple effect. And you can copy and paste this and run it then to sort of see what it does. And you say, oh, you know, rewrite it with 500 circles that appear at different times in random positions. And it goes, okay, I remember what I did before, and I see this, I'll try it, right? And it sort of gives you something back, and you say, so rewrite it so that circles repel from my cursor when I move my cursor around the screen, right? It's sort of, you have these things going back and forth with it. I just try to do these, like, again, I try to do an image post once a day, and then a sort of reel once a day. Try to just sort of build up a discipline for myself of, like, removing myself from whatever situational to-do list I have for that day, and just sort of saying, you know what, now I have 5 to 10 minutes to just, like, decompress, try something experimental and new and creative. And you know, here's an example of, you know, just sort of making a generative sketch and processing using ChatGPT. A lot of these things are, I would say, are things I could probably figure out and do manually anyway. So it's not, but I find that, sort of, doing these things once a day at least helps me sort of, it keeps me in the process, or sorry, keeps me in the project of AI, I guess I would say. Like, your brain sort of switches on and off, doing different things, and we all have our day jobs, and sometimes our day jobs feel like they're like really like full-time jobs. So I think it just helps, to sort of do these things and try to interrogate. So what I'd say is I'm trying to interrogate all these sort of models and things that are available to us, but how can we do things with them that we wouldn't do before? Can they become a creative medium, right? It's not like it's going to destroy photography or destroy painting or destroy art, but there's a niche for this, right? And so, what kind of body of work can we do with AI that we can't do with the others, or that we do differently than the others, right? I think is a question worth asking. It's sort of as the project of AI, right? But just sort of seeing what it's capable of doing. Here it is writing a Boyd's flocking script, for processing, and I just sort of post these on Instagram, and most people seem to like them. I get a few critics, but whatever. I mean, I don't care. Yeah, here's the process, right? Here I am on my phone and ChatGPT having a conversation. I can copy then the code and then execute it in processing directly on my phone. All of these are things I'm just doing on my phone. So it's really nice. I'm not tethered to my keyboard and a mouse and my laptop anymore with a lot of these things. Which, if you think about it, I mean, that's just radical, right? Like to say, I can leverage computational design without a mouse, a keyboard, just on my smartphone with an app. I don't even need, coding, and I can start to have things scripted for me. I mean, when these things become much more sophisticated, I think it's going to make things much more accessible. And so, I think that's actually fantastic. A lot of the firms I visit, they might have a young hotshot that does does a lot of the scripting and things like that for them. But a lot of these principals are really interested in this stuff, even if they have no clue how, these things might work under the hood, right? So there's a genuine interest in sort of trying to understand these tools, because I think the understanding is they're not worried about the technology replacing them. They're worried about somebody using this technology to replace them, right? So AI is not going to replace humans. Humans using AI will make certain things redundant. And so anyway, that was a long sort of tangent, but the robot writer it seemed like it. Really quickly, let me get back to this, and let's go over a few more things you can do. And again, we're just scratching the surface, whetting your appetite. Hopefully, again, if you don't have a budget to buy a subscription, you can always create. Don't tell anybody I said this, but you can always create several burner accounts and keep relogging in to get the free trial over and over again for a couple of times to really experiment here. So here is an example of using an image prompt. I said, imagine an immersive spatial installation made from blue glowing acrylic petals hanging from the ceiling of a tall gallery. And I got something that looked very much like sort of flower petals and things like that. So then I gave it installation photograph, where something more of what I had in mind from past work from Ball State actually, and pass that along with the text prompt. And then I can start to dial in, let's say, maybe the color, the geometry, or maybe it's how these things were configured in space. Maybe it's the background or whatever. Never know exactly what it's going to pick up from the image. And that's why it's nice to be able to re-roll and make variations of the things that you find more successful. You can ignore the things that you find less successful. So this is how you do it. Again, just a reminder, if you have the image, you need to upload the image so it has a URL. Then you put the URL for the image or images that you're going to use at the beginning of the prompt. Then you write the text prompt as you normally would, right? So in this case, I uploaded that image. I used its URL, put it at the beginning. Then I just reran the text prompt. There's one other command I'd like to talk about. It's similar to Imagine. It's called blend/blend, but basically it smashes together two image prompts and blends them together to give you some results. So here's an image of, I don't know if they're walking to the light, if that's a good thing or a bad thing, depending, I guess. It has this sort of fibrous, glowing sort of qualities to it, and otherwise dark space that appears infinite and sort of looks like there's some sort of spatial component that sort of extends forward. And here's one of those wax dipped feather installations, right? From the very beginning. I try to blend them together, and this is what I get, right? So here are some of the interesting results where it starts to mix and match various qualities from both images together, right? So I have people in one, people in the other. I start to get mixed match of colors, textures. You can start to see the blend of these sort of streaky, fibrous strands and trajectories in the left image with the feathery textures of the right image and the glows from the right images, etc. So that's a fun thing to play around with. And again, what I do is I type in /blend instead of /imagine. And then what it does, it says, okay, pick the first image. Let's see what I'll blend together here. Sometimes again, you blend things that aren't obvious together and you get some amazing things. Other times they're real duds. So it's about playing around. And let me just demonstrate that really quickly. Let's see. So let's do this one with let's say this one, right? So I'm going to blend these two images together and hit enter. All right, now while that's working, I'm gonna show you something else you can do with blend, right? You can begin to blend some of your traditional, maybe some of the representations that you generate in traditional workflows, right? So here's an example, let's say, of a 3D printed PLA model, just came right off the, a study model, let's say. Let's see here. And then this was a long exposure photograph. Well, as a prompt, I prompted Midjourney to try to do a long exposure photograph of an urban environment. Not bad. I think good photographers don't have anything to worry about yet. So if I smash those two things together, I have a setting, and then I have a model of a hypothetical design project. I can begin to blend these things together and let AI riff off of these, which I think is really interesting as well. So here's the first blend experiment I just did. You can see that I have the color scheme and some of the drippiness of the paint, along with some of the sort of white billowiness of the sort of cloudscapes that those two images blended together. Now I'm kind of curious to see what that study model in the urban photograph does. And then let me do one more. Let's see, blend. And I think I have maybe an example or two of maybe like here's like a graphite drawing from one of my students. One of those weird things when I used to do Foundation Studio, to have them draw something that definitely isn't architecture, but could become architecture, like a monster. This is a sea monster. I think this is the part of a crab claw or something, right? So I'll blend that with I have some good things maybe to blend these things with. Let's see where to go. This one seemed to work well. All right, so something spiky along with it. Let's see what that produces, right? So here's that study model then being blended with the urban environment, and suddenly parts of the study model, parts of the building start to look like infrastructure and sort of cutting through the building. And it's sort of kind of a weird thing. You can start to mix and match more traditional workflows with the AI workflow. There's another way, or it's a way to gain control over the process more. Any ways to sort of input more information for the prompts in order to sort of be able to predict or give more information for the outputs, right? So I just wanted to rerun that model one again. I'm not wasn't impressed with this, but it doesn't look like it's really immersed in that urban environment. I think you can do better. Here's that graphic, that graphite drawing mixed in with the sort of spiky rendering, and really sort of bizarre, right? Again, and sometimes I find ways to try to make Midjourney make things that don't look like Midjourney, sort of always after a while. I mean, I use Midjourney so much. I'm sure we've all seen so much Midjourney in outputs that you start to say like, oh, that's another Midjourney thing, right? So tricking Midjourney into making things that don't look like the typical Midjourney output is something I actually, when I stumble upon these things, I like to do more of them. So anyway, that's the blend tool, which again is basically just running two image prompts together and smashing them up into new compositions. All right, so let me just go back. Where's the Zoom interface here? Here it is. More questions or comments or after you spend hours with AI, what do you do to reconnect with your human your human prompts altered? Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing. It's like, well, after a while you experiment and you go down this rabbit hole, you come out of it going, well, what have I done? And am I making the world a better place? I think that's really the question we have to ask ourselves critically. How can these things actually help us? How are these going to help us solve some of the really hard problems that that clearly the 20th century thinking hasn't been able to solve. There's lots of existential problems. So I guess the question is, how can these things be good used for good? So it's like the end of my my presentation this morning. I thought I was being really well, I mean, if you can ask for anything, what do you ask, right? I mean, I think that's the question. And I think that's the question that everybody has a different answer for. But I think that's what you have to keep asking yourselves, right? Like, if you can get anything you want, well, what are the questions we're asking, right? And so but I see these tools hopefully as something that can augment your journey as you begin to try to address some of these really important questions. I mean, clearly the world needs more architecting. And so, whether that's architecting, it can be augmented with these tools. That's my hope. That's my hope, is that these things help us do better things. Learning Casey-Rias and Thoreau. Yeah, right. I mean, take a processing script from Casey and a beautiful piece of prose from Thoreau and see what happens, right? I mean, I saw the some of was it Richard that was on doing some ChatGPT for the flyers for this workshop, and yeah, it's really kind of interesting to sort of play around with ChatGPT, and that sort of idea of playing, structured play, is something that is important. Reconnecting afterwards, I guess, is important. Having conversations is important. Honestly, I will say this: as an educator, I've actually found it I found it easier to dive into having conversations, even philosophical conversation with students surrounding all those sort of issues and opportunities with AI and these tools, right? So it really sort of piques their interests. And again, it's one of the few ways I found to get them to writing where writing doesn't seem like a chore to them, but they're actually sort of rewarded for their writing. So how's your view on these technologies change as you spend more time with them and seeing them evolve? Yeah, it's really that's a good question. I don't know if I have a great answer for it. first of all, things are changing so quickly in this space that it's I come up with an impression and the impression changes, really kind of quickly. But two, it's hard to sort of step back and almost be critical uh, of these things. So that's why, that's a great question. As these technologies change, you spend more time with them. How do you see them evolve? So, I will say that, there is a sort of novelty to these tools, especially the first time you use them. They almost appear as like they're magic. As you begin to use them, you begin to understand that they aren't magic and that there's definitely limitations to them. There are certain things they can do and there's certain things they can't do. And so, it's kind of a really interesting thing. I have a tendency to sort of personify the models. I talk about them as almost as if they're sort of an interlocutor that I go back and forth with, because you are sort of typing and messaging them back and forth. You sort of have a tendency to think of it as something. I would very much consider it a conversation. You work with it in a much different way than, let's say, a piece of paper and pencil, right? I would also say that despite the fact that some of these results look like they're really highly resolved, right? Like some of these could even pass off as photographs. They are, I think, a really interesting tool. Unlike, I think, a lot of digital tools that I use a lot. Like, let's say let's pick one. I'll pick on Grasshopper for a minute, right? Parametric design. Grasshopper, the way I use it, or the way I had been using it, seems like a tool that helps me sort of resolve ambiguities and complexities with a high degree of precision. And these tools are almost the exact opposite. These tools, I find the value right now with just being able to generate images are more helpful when I want divergent thinking early on in the process. When I'm, so it sort of, again, becomes a creative team that thinks differently than you and can put things together differently than you might, and maybe challenges your preconceptions that the baggage that you come with when you're first thinking of some of the ideas and concepts that you're looking to explore. And so, I think one of the lines from this morning was, the diffusion model doesn't think like you, and that's exactly the point, right? So I would say it's been a journey in sort of understanding what it can do, what it can't do, trying to sort of understand it as a something that doesn't think like me, trying to figure out how does it think, right? It's not intelligent. And so, artificial intelligence, ultimately the goal of artificial intelligence is to make computers do things that like brains do them. And so, certain aspects of artificial intelligence have been achieved. It's really interesting to see how these language models, how powerful they actually are. They keep pumping all kinds of different training materials into them. And it seems like the more they pump into them, the training, the more resilient, maybe more general resilience gets built into them. They can start to do more and more things. But again, I would liken it more like as a savant, right? I mean, this image is beautiful. These 4 images are beautiful, and it can draw ripples and reflections in water and the sort of weathered tone in the stone incredibly well and incredibly fast and incredibly expressively without knowing what water, tone, stone, or ripples even are, right? It has no clue. And so, to me, trying to wrap my head around that has been an evolution, an evolutionary understanding. What are the current conversations happening related to authorship, the content generated with AI? Great question. And I'm not an expert on that. But there's a lot of information and a lot of misinformation about how these models work. So when you use one of these models, they have their own, how would I say, they have their own terms and conditions. So Midjourney doesn't care if you use the results of the Midjourney model commercially or personally. Yeah, they just don't care. But they also try to, as much as possible in their terms and conditions, wash their hands of any legal implications down the roads that you might face if you try to use the images commercially. My understanding of copyright law is that you can use and mix and match other people's work as long as there's always that question of how derivative your work is from the other work or how transformative your work is from the other work, right? And if it's highly derivative, then why is it derivative? Is it a matter of free speech, like you're being critical, or is it just a matter of copying and infringing on copyright? So I think there's a gray area, and I think the Copyright Office, the United States Copyright Office, is waffled back and forth on this a little bit. And I don't think they have clear guidelines yet that they're willing to stick with for a while on it. I will say that there's lots of misinformation out there too. So like when you I have probably, I don't know, I would say a handful of times a week, I get some sort of raging critic on my Instagram that just wants to, be a jerk. And whatever. But oftentimes their arguments aren't necessarily based in technical reality. So like some of their arguments that they'll make, I think are good arguments, and some of the arguments they make are just completely stupid and bunk, right? So this is not a collage tool. It doesn't mix and match things from other people's images and then collage them together. It's basically the model itself is only a few gigabytes. You cannot possibly store the entire known digitized body of graphic outputs of Western and Eastern civilization as we know it into just a matter of a few gigabytes. The training data is actually enormous, but the models themselves are actually a bunch of algebraic Markov equations that basically make predictions on how to draw things from static. And so it's really a bunch of instructions. So when it comes to what I call machine learning, this really is a learning process for the model, and then the model can draw things from scratch. Right. So yeah, it's not really stealing per se, at least in the way I would call it stealing. But when it comes to authorship and control in another way, there's always the fact that it had to train off of someone, a bunch of other stuff. There's also the fact that you're giving up control, right? So is it Midjourney that's doing this? Is it my image? Is it Midjourney's image? Can I claim authorship of it if AI generated it for me? Is it still creative? Am I being creative? I would argue that it's maybe, I wouldn't put it in binary terms, like it's one or the other. I would think that both the sort of craft and creativity aren't necessarily reliant on how little or how much you're relying on machine technology, whether that's a table saw, whether that's a computer or a mouse, whether that's a neural network. I would also say that there is creativity involved in coming up with ideas, whether I'm moving the mouse around and manually drawing those, or whether I'm telling the computer with plain English what to do, or whether I'm encoding my thoughts into a computer script and scripting what I want the computer to do. Like I think they're all different moments on a continuum with how we interact with computers as a tool. And so, what I will say is that you give up control, but by giving up some control, you give, in this case, the AI model the space to combine whatever your ideas were and with the language that you input with that latent space of the model to come up with things that you might not have even dreamt of. So it's a sort of tickler extender of the imagination in a way that I think is really exciting. And it's been talked about for a long time when it comes to generative computational design. It's been talked about for a long time, but only scratch the surface, and sometimes even just talked about in the abstract. So it's really amazing that just these things just sort of sprang up in the summer of 2022, and now everybody's wielding these things in there with an iPhone app, right? Or, you know, sort of able to do these things. So yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, except to say that authorship is something I'm not. It's interesting because people go like, you know, somebody again wants to be a jerk on Instagram. They're like, did you do this, or did it, you know, AI did this, right? And it's like, yes and yes. Like I don't know. Like I mean, come on. Like who? If this is about your ego, then you know, I don't know. Maybe you. I mean, you can't not do something without technology. A book is technology. A pencil is technology. Paper is technology, you know, paint is technology, right? I mean, think about all of these things, right? And I think a lot of folks are scared. I think that's natural. I mean, I think people were scared about the printing press. I think people were scared about photography. And I think what ended up happening is that, you know, the world went on. The genie was out of the bottle. You couldn't go back. It was about going forward and how to go forward, right?
Well, hey, Josh, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure can. It's noon.
Awesome. Yeah, super great, man. And thank you so much. I think the way that I don't know if you saw in the chat, Miguel left a comment saying that you cleared up some of his initial concerns and opened his eyes to some possibilities. I think the real potential here is that this is opening up our conversation about who we are and what our principles are and how we're going to organize ourselves as a society. And the questions are maybe no different than the questions we've always been asking along the way. So thank you for your thoughts, your insight, your expertise, Josh. It's so great to see you out there and doing.
Thanks to everybody for sharing part of your Saturday with me. Yeah.
Yep. Say hello to your family and your human side and have a wonderful rest of the weekend. You've really I can't thank you enough for all that you've given us here, Josh.
Of course, for Kevin Klinger, anything.
We're so proud of you, Josh. Take good care.
All right. Great connecting with all of you. Reconnecting with some of you. I'll see you in cyberspace.
Happy Friday.
Take care now.
Okay, now how do I save that? Any idea?
I think you try to end the meeting for all, like, she'll prompt you. I think it's still recording outside.
But I don't know where it's recording to. That's the problem.